All right, class. It is Tuesday after fall break. Hope everybody had a great break. Did you do anything fun during fall break? I hope so. Hope it wasn't all serious business. Make sure everything's all set. So we have a test coming up. I just want to mention this for those folks watching the replay and everybody live here. It's going to open tomorrow at noon, and I might even open it early. I may even open it like 8 a.m. or something. So you've got tomorrow, let's just say tomorrow at noon until Friday at noon to take the exam. Everybody okay with that? I'm going to do so Wednesday at noon to Friday at noon. And it'll be open. And it'll be a respondents test just like the first one. The difference between, and I may have mentioned this before, is that the first test didn't have many calculations. There are going to be more calculations on this exam, and it's all related to the nutrients during exercise. Oh, others in the waiting room. Thank you. I don't see them. Hold up. Let me see. I'm just going to admit all and see what happens. Okay. There'll be more calculations around the recommendations during exercise, before, during, and after exercise. And we've talked about all those mainly they're related to carbohydrate and protein consumption, but there is a little bit to talk about around fat. But fat isn't used during exercise, right? When you eat fat, wow, in the chat, just type in, why isn't fat used during exercise? The fat we eat, let me put it that way. Why isn't it? Just tell me. I see it. You see. Yeah, it takes too long. Gabby, you're exactly right. It takes too long. By the time you eat the fat in the foods you consume during exercise, for it to get into your body and be digested. And no, it has to be something like the carbohydrate mainly, because you're going to be, especially in its simplest form, it will be used more quickly. The fat just going to take way too long. But there is some important things, and mainly the main focus of this lesson today is around the myths around fat. We're going to bust some of those too. So let me do that. So the test, need a calculator. You can have a blank sheet of paper. You're going to have from, let's say, Wednesday at noon to Friday at noon to take it. It's going to be a 60 question-ish test, like they always are. And I will have the equations if I'm going to ask you to do a calculation of total energy expenditure, which you will have to do. Will there be 50 of the 60 questions calculations? No, but there will be a few, and so there'll be some similar to the case study that you did. So just be okay with that and be comfortable with the numbers. And the challenge is, if you're not comfortable with the numbers, then it's going to take you longer to take the test, and it's also going to trip you up because you won't be able to, maybe finish the test. Most of you will have no problem, I'm sure. But I'm just saying, go back through those calculations, those equations. I will give them to you. I won't give you the conversions, like I won't give you how to get, pounds to kilograms, or, centimeters to centimeters. But okay, everybody okay with that? I'm gonna share my screen, and let me get going, and we'll talk about fat today. So let's see if I can get my screen, get into full screen here. I think I need to swap, don't I? Okay, so hopefully now you're able to see in the chat. Can you let me know that you're seeing my full screen? Full screen? Yeah, okay, full screen, good deal. Because related to fat, I think I've given you the main recommendation around fat, and it's daily needs. It's a minimum of 1 gram of fat per kilogram of body weight. And so that doesn't sound like much, like if I'm a 70 kilogram individual, that's 70 grams of fat. But what do we know about fat? It's more calorie dense, if you will. It's 9 calories per gram. So that's those calories add up. But a minimum, and it could go higher, it could be a little lower, but around about 1 gram per kilogram body weight. And then we also know this major recommendation. It's just around the general amount of fat in our diet, right? 20 to 35% of your calories should be from fat. Everybody good with that? Give me a yes, give me a thumbs up. Talk to me. Let me know you're with me. Okay, you're with me. Good deal. Give me your favorite emoji. And I'm in this picture, I've got a glass of milk and I've got some cake. Anybody like that, milk and cake? So we've got in the milk, right? We've got fat depending on what type. Anybody want to take a guess? And I do this in some other classes, but what's your favorite type of milk? Do you do like whole milk? Anybody do whole milk? Do you do 2%? What type of milk do you do? Yeah, Elliot's 2%. Okay. Elliot's whole milk. Anybody want to take a guess at the amount of fat, percentage wise, in whole milk? It gets confusing, but tell me. Type in the chat. What do you think? 5%. Well, it's in whole milk. So 5%, it's higher than 5. I can tell you that. At least it's 3. I'm just going to say it's way higher than 5%. How about that? To give you a hint. Anybody? 10%? Oh my goodness. No. You can look this up. It's closer to 50%. That's why it's thicker. You can look at the math. What I do oftentimes in my face-to-face classes, I'll pull up a slide that shows you like a nutrition facts panel of a carton of milk or something, whole milk, and it's about 40, 42 maybe percent of the calories from fat. Is that a good thing or bad thing? Well, it just depends on the athlete, depends on the individual. Okay. Some people that maybe want to gain weight, whole milk's fine. Other people that maybe want to lose weight, maybe we need to drink skim milk or 2% or something where you're getting less calories. It just is dependent on the individual and what their needs are. I'm not going to say good or bad. Some people will frown on whole milk, but anybody just don't like the taste of whole milk, because it is pretty thick, and that's why. And even when you do like 2%, and you can look this up, but 2% milk is around 30-ish percent. 2% milk, even though it gets confusing, it's about 30% of calories from fat. That's why that's the difference. Milk's going to have the same amount of protein and same amount of carbohydrate, unless it's chocolate milk, and it's going to have more carbs. But usually it's going to have 8 grams of protein a cup and 12 grams of carbohydrate a cup. But what changes is the fat, and that's going to change the calorie count on the individual, cup of milk that you eat. That's fat. If is it whole milk, skim milk, 2%, whatever milk you choose. So I just want to point that out. It's not really a good or bad. It's just preference and what you need. And then, there's always some opportunity if you're exercising regularly to eat some things like cake, eat some sweets every now and then. And you can do that and get away with it. And this is just showing you a nutrition facts panel. And you should all be good with the idea that when you look at a nutrition facts panel and it says, 250 calories and 110 of those are coming from fat. And you look down here and it says, if we find fat, that you have 12 grams of fat in this cup. So you do the math, somebody do that real quick. 12 times 9, it's probably not going to come up to, it's going to be close. This is why some students, they get confused and get frustrated. The nutrition facts panel that you see on all these products, they're not perfect. They're going to get you close. So instead of 108, you're going to get 110. So it doesn't always add up to the total calories, and that they allow for that. The FDA allows you to do that and get close, but just know there's going to be a little bit of difference. And the question is, in the chat, are y'all okay with doing the math on some of these? I think maybe you had a couple of these last test, and you may see one or two maybe of these on this test, understanding the percentages and how to do this, right? Carbohydrates, 31 grams. How many calories from carbs? You got to multiply that by 4, right? Okay. Everybody good with this nutrition facts panel? And oftentimes what happens is, as athletes and active individuals, we promote this lower fat eating approach. And if you are exercising a lot, you're probably going to be focused more on eating a higher carbohydrate diet and maybe getting the adequate protein in there, which typically means you're going to be doing a lower amount of fat inherently. But there are people, and we can talk about this later, that are using a high fat approach for their exercise as well, and lowering the carbs. So although we like to think of things as black and white, oftentimes there's a lot of gray in here. But for most of us, and what is being promoted is more of a low fat approach, where you're eating carbohydrate, moderate amounts of protein, and low amount of fat. And that's the reason you see the recommendation of 20 to 35% of calories from fat. Do people have success eating 70% of their calories from fat? Some people do. Usually we typically think of endurance athletes, but some people do. And then, there are a lot of reasons why when you talk about intake of fat, that you really don't want to restrict your fat. You see some people that are, and some athletes that are just fat phobic and just general exercisers. And I can see why fat may be demonized, because you have more calories per gram, right? And when you look at fat, we just tend to think of the fat that accumulates on our body. But if you're exercising a lot, you don't have to worry about that. Or sometimes people have genetics that allow for them to, get away with eating a little more fat than others. But there's a lot of important functions of fat, and we know this, right? So this is a good review. Somebody type in the chat, what's a function of fat for us? What does fat do? What's an important role of fat? This is a nutrition 101 thing. And there still may be a few questions around nutrition. Okay, LSS, they form cell membranes, good. Insulate, protects, yes. Yes, insulation. What about absorption of fat-soluble vitamins? In my 8 o'clock class, we talked about lipoproteins, right? So you have triglycerides in those lipoproteins. You talk about HDL and LDLs, right? We talk about fat that's needed for the myelin sheath of your nerves. We talked about that in our last 8 o'clock class this morning. So there's a lot of reasons to eat fat. So you don't really want to restrict it. The question is, what's the right amount for you and based on your exercise? And if you are exercising a lot, and that's what you see in the next point, is some of these ultra runners who are running 80, 100 miles a week, 120 miles a week, they're going to be eating more calories. And so that allows them to eat more fat. They may be eating up to 3 grams of fat per kilogram of their body weight. If you do the math on that, you're going to see that that's a lot of fat. But as we mentioned, there's no reason to eat fat during exercise because it takes too long to digest and for it to even be absorbed, because you got to get it absorbed from the bloodstream, then you got to get it into your cell, then a muscle cell, then you got to get into the mitochondria, because that's where it's broken down, right? Is in the mitochondria of our cell. So we can't, we don't have that kind of time. That's why when you hear about before and after exercise, it's more around the carbohydrate and fat, or sorry, the carbohydrate and protein intake. And yes, you can eat, have your Starbucks. Like I got my Starbucks, I sure do. I got some half and half in here probably. It's what they put in this in my Starbucks. But you just have to watch out with some of the products. I don't get into all the frou-frou. Just do a simple coffee. I don't know what y'all do, but there's fat in that, and that's okay, right? As long as it's part of your daily plan. Now, while you can't use the fat that you eat during exercise, you are during your exercise using a lot of fat that you already have stored. Okay, especially when it comes to endurance exercise. Okay. And we can measure this. We've shown a little bit of that in this class, looking at the lab reports. You put somebody on a metabolic cart, you have them run, and this metabolic cart will tell you how many, percent of carbohydrate, percent of fat, and how many grams of each. And so it's an interesting device. And what you probably heard if you had exercise physiology is a term called respiratory exchange ratio, or RAR. And basically it reflects how much fat and carbohydrate you're using during exercise. And if you're closer to 0.7, you're burning more fat. If you're closer to 1, you're burning more carbohydrate. So this metabolic cart will tell you this. And the important piece to it is that what we tend to think is during exercise that my exercise should be slow and easy to burn more fat. How many of you have heard that before? Like, to burn fat, you gotta exercise easy or low intensity. Maybe that's a better way to say it. How many of you have heard that before? Type in the chat. Yes or no? You've probably seen on some of these devices in the gym. Anybody seen like one of these like fat burning zone stickers or charts? Yeah. Yeah. So, but that's not true. And let me show you this. And we do, one of the ways that we can demonstrate this is by using RER. And we used to have to hand calculate this stuff, but now with computers, it does it for you. So at rest, let's say they're showing you this person has a heart rate of like 72 beats a minute. Their RER is like 0.77, which means they're burning 78% fat and 21% carbohydrate. And they're burning 1.4 calories at rest. And they even can, from this, can tell you how many calories fat, how many calories from carbohydrate. But what happens is, and this is just to first demonstrate that as intensity increases, you're burning more carbohydrate. And we already know this, right? You're burning more carbohydrate as exercise intensity increases because you don't have time to use the fat during exercise. And so what you're seeing is as you go, there's this running. So they put somebody on a treadmill and they're running a 9.5 minute per mile pace, and then they increase the pace and make it faster, which makes they're running. So they're running a 9 minute per mile pace, 8.5 minute per mile pace, and then an 8 minute pace. Everybody tracking with me on this? So the intensity is increasing. You can tell that because the heart rate's increasing and the RER is going closer to 1. Everybody following this? But what that also means is that as you increase your intensity, then the fat utilization is lower as well, and you start to burn more and more carbohydrate. Everybody following this? And we used to do something like this when I used to teach exercise phys. We would have somebody and we'd put them on the treadmill and we'd walk them at like 50% of their max or something, heart rate max, and we would measure their numbers, and we'd have them run, right, at a faster pace. And so they'd be walking and then they'd be running. And what you see is that the biggest difference is that inherently, and you can see this, if you're at the 9:30 pace, you're burning, 40% of your calories from fat. But if you're at the 8 minute pace, you're only burning 27% of your calories from fat. Everybody's seeing these numbers. But guess what the difference is? What's the difference between even, this person's probably running anyway, but running at a slower pace and running at a faster pace. And the same thing happens when you're walking. When I'm walking at 3 miles an hour, maybe I'm burning 100% of my calories from fat. Think about this. If I'm walking at 3 miles an hour, let's say I'm burning 100%, maybe even not 100%, but I'm burning 100% of my calories from fat. But when I'm, say, running at 8 miles an hour, I'm just making this up, 8 miles an hour, I may be burning 20% of my calories from fat. What's the biggest difference? What's the factor here? Okay, so heart rate's going to go up for sure. But what's the next column? What's this column that people don't take into consideration? It is true if I'm walking at 3 miles an hour, I might be burning all my calories from fat. But how many calories am I burning? That's the question you should be asking. How many calories are you going to be burning when you walk at 3 miles an hour? I mean, it's showing you here you're burning, we know you burn about a calorie a minute at rest. Let's say you're walking 3 miles an hour and you may be burning 3 calories a minute. Okay. And all those calories are coming from fat. So that's 3 calories a minute. Yay for us. But then if you're running, say you're burning 20% of those calories from fat, but you're burning 15 calories a minute. Right? Well, 20% of those calories are going to be more than 3 calories a minute. I don't know. That makes sense. Let's just say it's going to be at least 3 calories, probably, let's just say 4 calories. So point is, it's more about total calories. And I used to describe it and it's easier in a face-to-face class. I used to walk up to a student, like say, Vincent, I'm going to give you 100% of what I have in my left pocket. I got money in both pockets. Start with that. I got money in both pockets. I'm going to give you 100% of what I have in my left, or I'm going to give you 10% of what I have in my right. Which pocket do you want? I got money. So you want 100% of what's in my left, or 10% of what's in my right? Yeah, it depends on, that's right. Depends on how much money you got. And that's exactly right, because what I usually do, if somebody, and back in the day, students would just say, oh yeah, I want 100%, I want 100%. And so I would pull out, of course, I never would have any money in my pocket. Yeah, most people pick the 100%, right? But in my left pocket, I only have $1 bill. So you get 100% of my $1. Versus if you'd have said, I want the 10% of what's in my right, well, guess what? I got $100 bill. And that's a lie, because I'm a professor and I never carry around $100 bills. But just, you get 10% of that $100 bill, which is $10. It's the same idea with exercise. We do people a disservice to say, hey, just walk a slow pace, easy. Now, I understand that people are just getting started and they got some physical limitations and things. That's fine, but you just don't burn that many calories. I was working with a client years and years ago, and she needed to lose weight, and she was telling me, she was losing initially, and then it just stalled. And she said she was walking an hour. I said, what would be your question if it's like, I'm not losing weight and I'm walking 1 hour? What would your question be? What would your question be on that? If you're just walking 1 hour, 1 hour is a lot though, right? How far? Yeah. What intensity? Okay. What's another way to put that, Gage? What's another way? What's the other piece to this that you don't think about? I'm not making this stuff up. Okay, what intensity, but what's related to that? Somebody help Gage that. Exactly, Vincent. How far? Anybody want to guess how far she was walking in an hour? 1 mile. That's it. She was walking a mile. And for her, maybe that was good, but it's going to be hard to lose weight if you're just walking a mile. We've already said, what, 1 mile, you're burning about 100 calories or so, depending on how big you are. So what I tend to recommend is for people is to exercise at a comfortable but challenging pace that they can maintain for whatever the distance or duration they're planning on going. So, if you just have 30 minutes to work out, then exercise at a comfortable but challenging pace. Because what we see too often is people, go walking around the track and they're just socializing. It's a social event. It happens at the gym too, lifting weights, right? You get the guys and gals that they lift a set and then they do social time for half an hour, and then they do back and do another set. Same idea. So when you look at using, because it really boils down to how many total calories are you burning? And it doesn't even really necessarily have to come from fat. The truth is, I mean, you think about anaerobic sports like tennis, right? In professional tennis, you don't see a whole lot of overweight professional tennis players, right? Because they do it so much. But for us, when you're talking to and counseling people on activity, it's like if you're walking at that slower pace, you just have to realize, yeah, you're going to burn a greater percentage of calories from fat, but because the total energy that you're expending is so much lower, and you can see that here in the slide, you're at running a 9.5 minute per mile pace. You're burning even this, they're still burning quite a few calories, 11.5 at 9.5 minute per mile pace. And then when they run 8 minute per mile, they're burning like 15.5. When you look at the fat calories, you're burning just as many, okay, at the higher intensity, and but you're burning more calories overall, which is going to be beneficial. So I would focus on the total number of calories expended, not whether you're at this slower pace or faster pace. And if you have a choice, and not that you want to exercise hard every single session, but there should be some times when you're challenge yourself, because that's where you're going to burn the most calories. So that's what it really should be more about. And life's not fair. You know, we talked about, giving an example of the overweight gal who was exercising an hour and burning, you know, walking 1 mile. That's a good place to start. But like, even for me, as even I'm older, I could still run 6-7 miles in an hour. So I'm able to burn 600-700 calories or so, where this individual is only burning like 100 or 200, you know. So the fitter you are, it helps to increase the number of calories you can burn. So that's one myth that we just busted, that you have to exercise at a lower intensity to lose fat. And that's not the case at all. Matter of fact, it would probably be beneficial to be exercising at a higher intensity. And when we look at this is something we just mentioned in the last slide, but this graph shows you what happens as your intensity increases. I mean, we oftentimes talk about VO2 max, right? That's the maximum amount of oxygen your body can consume and all of the things, but it relates to intensity. So as intensity increases, you can see what happens to carbohydrate. Carbohydrate increases, and that's the red here. And then as intensity increases, your fat's going down. And at some point, you're going to have a crossover. And that's what this is, a crossover point. And what happens with training and fitness is that you can move this crossover point to the right, so that you're exercising at, let's say, 60% of your max, but you're burning more fat at that percentage. Your body becomes a better fat burner. And so you can shift this crossover point further to the right, closer to, and that's what happens with like marathoners, is that they're pretty much redlining the whole way. They're exercising at a very high intensity, high percentage of their max, but because of their training, they're able to burn large amounts of fat even when they're running at 5 minute per mile pace or something. But again, these folks are, some of it's genetics, some of it's obviously training, diet even will play a factor. But that's, and in your book, I don't know what page it's on, they talk about this crossover concept, where at some point, you know, when you're looking here, the crossover is around 30%, 40%. But if you can increase that to 60 or 70, then that's going to be beneficial. And this is just another slide showing, based on what the graph around the RER, just showing you what happens with, as you increase your speed and running on the treadmill, the number of calories that you burn from fat, it goes up to a point, but then when we hit that crossover point, it's going to start to go down, and the carbohydrates just continue to go up.
Are you ready?
So it's my wife. All right, going to the airport. So that's intensity. Let's talk about duration for a minute. So, because a lot of people, you know, when you go for a run or go for exercise, endurance wise, you're like, I just want to get on the bike and I just want to ride for you know, 2 hours at a fixed duration. So we call that steady state exercise. And so what happens over time, you know, with intensity, as intensity goes up, carbohydrate use goes up, fat goes down. But with prolonged duration of exercise, over time, what happens is fat actually will go up because you can't exercise at a really high intensity. Here we're showing you over 2 hours here. Fat ends up going up, and as we start to use our glycogen stores, carbohydrate will go down a bit, but fat utilization tends to go up over time. Any questions on that? So the differences between, you know, what intensity does with our nutrients versus the duration. With intensity, and the biggest factor, and this goes back to even our first test, is that really the main factor that drives all this and what source you're using for fuel is what your intensity is. Okay? Because intensity will also affect the duration. Obviously, if you're going for 2 hours, you're not going to be able to go as intensely as you could if you were just going for an hour or 30 minutes, right? But what happens over time is that the longer you go, the more fat you're using for fuel and the less carbohydrate. Some of that's just because you're starting to use some of your glycogen stores and it's becoming depleted, more depleted. And your body's just able to use fat because you're exercising at this aerobic pace. Okay. And so this is, I jumped the gun on this a little bit in that, so do you have to burn fat to lose fat? I guess it's the same idea, is that no, you don't. And so some of these like machines will have these fat burning zones on them. And the truth is there an optimal zone? Okay, the place where you use fat the greatest, maybe, but it's individualized. And the reality is we can't really pick that out without getting into a lab, and so it's not even really worth it. The point is, going back to what we said before, is that at the lower intensity, you have a greater percentage of energy derived from fat, but the total energy expenditure is lower. And that becomes a problem. And is even when you exercise, even through all the different ranges, you know, you're still burning fat and if I went back to that one slide, you're still burning fat at 80% of your max. You're still burning fat if it's, you know, at higher percentage of effort. You're just not burning as much. It goes from, you know, 25% to 20% to 10%, right? The closer you get to that one on, you know, RAR. But with us, like I said, we tend to tell people to exercise at this lower intensity. And it's like the same thing with this picture of this individual lifting weights. We tend to think that you can't, which makes no sense, right? You can't lose fat lifting weights, and we know better than that. And it works a little differently, but like when you put on muscle, that's why people want to do this, right? When you put on muscle, that extra tissue requires calories, and most of the time those calories are going to be coming from fat because the weightlifting that you're doing is an anaerobic exercise. Even if you're doing circuit training workout, it's still an anaerobic exercise. But the calories that you're burning through weight training plus the muscle that you're putting on potentially will help benefit you because it will help you burn more calories at rest. And then also as you're putting on that extra muscle tissue. The extra tissue is going to cause you to burn more calories. And usually those calories are coming from fat. Same thing as I mentioned, like with the tennis players that exercise a lot. It's like, you can lose weight doing anaerobic exercise. You just got to do a lot of it, right? These tennis players, they're out there for hours, or any type, like soccer players, even though you're running around more maybe in soccer. But I think you get the idea. It's this, like I said, with endurance exercise, it's easier to get the point in that you're burning fat during your exercise, right? But with resistance training, the interesting thing is there's been studies to show that once you finish a weight training session, that your metabolic rate stays increased up to say 24 hours after a hard workout. So you do burn some extra calories after your session. And if you've taken exercise phys, you may have heard of something called excess post-oxygen consumption. But basically, it's the number of calories, because think about it. If you exercise really hard, like if you get on the treadmill and you run for an hour and you were at rest and your metabolism was at rest, and then you exercise for an hour, that so you were burning 1 calorie at rest per minute, and then you're exercising on the treadmill and you're burning 10 calories a minute, let's say. Once you stop running, your metabolism just doesn't go back to 1 all of a sudden. There's a gradual decrease back down to rest. So those calories, those extra calories, are important. Can be. Same thing with lifting weights. Like I said, you lift weights hard, like this guy here, you're going to burn extra calories after the session is over, which is another good point. So it's not necessary to burn fat during exercise to lose body fat. And it's really more about the total energy you're expending. It's more important than the percentage expended from fat. And that's where people get confused. Okay. And then let's talk about some of the general adaptations, especially for endurance exercise. One of the things, how are people able to use more fat? Well, one of the things that they do is when you train endurance-wise, you teach your body, like I said, to burn more fat and to mobilize these triglycerides from your adipocytes or your adipose cells. So you actually teach. There was one marathoners years and years ago, but they had him hooked up to a metabolic cart, and just the fact that his body knew that he was getting ready to get on the treadmill and run, the metabolic cart showed that he started burning more fat going from rest to exercise, because his body it's so attuned to doing that, it automatically starts burning more fat just from the thought of, okay, I'm getting ready to run. And then not only that, you have fat that's taken up into the cell, and you start to also increase those organelles, those mitochondria. And not only do we increase the size of these things, but we also increase the number. Like when you see a picture in a biology book or something, even in this book, right, where I've shown you a cell earlier, and you see like 1 mitochondria. That's not the case, especially in these muscle cells, because you'll have multiple mitochondria. And think about this. If I'm running at 6 miles an hour on the treadmill, and I've got 1 mitochondria that's working and doing all the load, and with training, I can increase that to 2 or 3 or 4, then they're sharing the load. It makes it easier, right? Which ultimately leads to you being able to burn more fat, because you got more of these now. It just makes you able to perform better, and then increase your VO2 max and increase your endurance, essentially. So training is the best approach to that. So you're using more fat, you teach your body to use more fat, you increase the size and number of mitochondria. And when you look at fat in your diet, endurance performance is not likely to improve. So what I'm meaning by that is when you eat more fat, even though there are people that do that and that's their approach, the research really hasn't shown that you're able to perform better. These people that are doing high fat diets, and there's plenty of them, and we could talk about them if you want to, that are using this high fat approach, eating 60-70% of their calories from fat, these endurance athletes, they probably would perform just as well if they were taking carbohydrate. They just prefer not to. So I have yet to see a study on these endurance athletes where they perform better on the high fat diet than doing even a mixed diet with plenty of carbohydrate and fat. So just know that it can work for people. I've even used it some and done less carbohydrate, more of a low carbohydrate approach, not a keto, but people can do it. Do you perform better on the high fat? Probably not. But if that's your preference and you'd rather eat a low carb and a high fat approach, then go for it. So the problem with this, and this is what you see here, because eating fat, a lot of fat in your diet, and less carbohydrate, what it's going to limit, and think about this, we just showed you this, is that if you need to really perform at your best and during really serious, intense exercise, you're going to need some carbohydrate. You're going to need some carbohydrate to fuel those intense, whether you're running up a hill or maybe you're doing some sprinting at the end, whatever it is, you're going to need some carbohydrate for that. And the high fat approach, depends on how low carb you go. It's probably not going to provide you with the carbohydrate you need for that glycolytic energy system. But it can be for some of the middle of the packers, back of the packers, if they choose to do that, to where you can, sustain like a lower intensity for a long period of time. It can work. Does it work better than eating carbohydrate and fat? Probably not. So the intensity would have to really come down because you just don't have the carbohydrate. But there are people that are successful on this. I'll stop sharing, but anybody heard of runners doing, and I mean, there's even research to show even strength trained athletes can do okay with a high fat approach. It's just not, are you going to do better than eating some carbohydrate? Probably not. And even when you look at some of these athletes that have been successful, what you see is during their exercise, they're probably having a little bit of carbohydrate along the way. It's nothing like what I would do, like doing an Ironman. I'm eating 300 calories an hour and I'm all carbohydrate. Well, for athletes that have trained their body to use fat more effectively, they can get away with consuming 100 calories an hour or something a lot smaller in amounts, if that makes sense. Is it more successful? I don't think that it is. I've tried it and I've done a lower carb approach. It's just hard to find foods that will work for you when you're out there for hours on end. It's easier to find the Pop-Tarts and again, I limit this to in and around exercise. It's not like I'm walking around eating Pop-Tarts all the time. But some people, they're like, you know what, I'm not going to do that at all. I'm going to eat nuts and seeds and whatever they're eating, that it's low carb to help them fuel their way down the path, whatever they're doing, whether it's a ultra run or even like some of these shorter runs, it's just going to be hard, 5K, 10K, where you've got to have some speed and intensity there. It's just going to be hard to have a benefit from doing a high fat approach. Although people could be successful. I don't know that they would be as successful, or they'd be just as successful if they did the carb approach and eating a mixed diet with some carbohydrates in there. All right. questions, comments? That's really all I had today, y'all. I just wanted to cover this one chapter. Any specific questions around the test? Any specific questions? I'll open that up tomorrow. I say noon, but it may be earlier than that. It may be 8 o'clock. You'll use Respondus and typical hour and 15 minutes, like you were sitting in class with me. What do you think? We good? And we just covered the fat chapter. There may be a few questions around fat. Maybe some nutrition 101, along with the other chapters too. There's always going to be like some nutrition 101 questions, but not as many, because we're going to focus on carbohydrates before carbohydrates, protein, and fat before, during, and exercise, and after exercise. And those recommendations are going to be key. You just need to know those. All right, we good? Talk to me in the chat. Kind of quiet, talking to myself here. Come on now. All right, Vince, I give 1 thumbs up, 2 thumbs up. Well, thanks, y'all. Have a great rest of your day. I'll open up that test. If you do have questions, comments, just shoot me an email and I'll get back with you. That's it for today. We're going to cut it short. Because I don't want to go, we've got time, but I don't want to jump into the next chapter. I just want to end it here, and we will see you. So we'll see you on Tuesday, a week from today, because we won't have class, because you using that to take your test on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday till noon. Okay, Friday till noon, because I'm giving people the window. I know that's helpful for a lot of y'all. So, all right, thanks for being here, and we'll see you a week from today. All right, bye for now.